My name is Karen Hollebrands. I'm an Associate Dean for Research and Innovation in the College of Education. I'm also the co-chair of the Planning Committee for this event. Juliana Abney, she's waving her hand right there, is also co-chairing the Planning Committee. Thank you. We appreciate her leadership for this event. This event truly is a university-wide endeavor and would not be possible without the support of our many sponsors. We have, you can't see them. We have the Colleges of Humanities and Social Sciences, the College of Education, Engineering, Ag, and Life Science, and all the others listed. We're very grateful for their support for this event. We're also grateful for the Harrelson Speaker Series Fund, who is sponsoring our keynote speaker today. Just a few logistics. You can find the full program at our Go link, go.ncsu.edu/Equity Symposium 2022. We also have a list of all of our sessions in the guidebook app. If you point your phone at that QR code, that should download the app for you. Within that app, you can create your own schedule, you can take notes, you can connect with others who are also on the app, and we have a live stream to our Twitter feed. The hashtag we're recommending that you use is shown there, so feel free if you are posting on social media to use that hashtag. Also, just an update on our lunch. We'll begin at 12 o'clock. We will have box lunches available, and then the keynote speaker will begin at 12:15. Juliana will be introducing the provost, who will be making some remarks, and then we will turn it over to Raj Chetty for the keynote address. Just a little bit about who is here. We had over 118 presenters who have signed up to attend. This is fabulous. If you're like me, this is the largest event you've been in person in almost 2 years, so we're so thrilled to be here in person. We also have 326 people who have registered to attend, both virtually and in person, and we're very grateful for our 46 volunteers who have agreed to help us out throughout the day. And many of you might have seen them in the hallway and at the registration desk. So thank you so much to our volunteers. We also have a wonderful planning committee that has helped to put on the event. They're all listed here, and we would not be able to have this today if it wasn't for all their hard work. So we want to extend our thanks to our planning committee members. If they're here today, if they want to stand and be recognized so we can acknowledge their assistance. All of our planning committee members, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. We appreciate your help. We also received assistance from our executive assistants in putting together a variety of things, including the program. So we want to acknowledge their support as well. Finally, our theme for today's symposium, what does equity mean to me? And so we want you to reflect on this question because we know equity can mean lots of different things to various people. And so we've created a QR code. You'll see that also on your tables, and it'll be posted around the Student Union today. Go ahead and link to that QR code, and it will allow you to enter some words that come to mind as you think about what equity means to you. At the end of the symposium, we'll be able to generate a word cloud from the words that you contribute, and we can share what that looks like for those who have attended today. So we encourage you to engage in that activity. All right, so now I will invite Deanna Daniels, Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, to provide a welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, come on. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. I am just giddy. This is the first conference I've been to in over 2.5 years, so I am thrilled to be here. I am thrilled to been to in person, of course. Thrilled to see all of you and welcome you to the Equity Research Symposium. You've seen all the notes of thanks that Karen shared. I just want to reiterate, thank you to my fellow deans for your support of the symposium. Thank you to Jeff Braden and Marianne Danowitz for getting this ball rolling and getting the momentum started for this. Thank you, Juliana and Karen, for all of the hard work you have done. And thank you to our university partners. Finally, thank you to each and every one of you for your commitment to this symposium and your commitment to equity. I thank you for being committed to what I see as the crux of what we do here together at NC State. Now, you may know the word crux in its colloquial terms. I know it as a term related to climbing. My daughter's a competitive rock climber and has been climbing for 10 years. The crux of a climb is the most difficult part of the climb. It is a sequence of moves where people are most likely to fall. Climbs are defined essentially by their cruxes. In fact, the grade of a climb, its level of difficulty, is determined by the crux or cruxes on that climb. Issues related to equity and inequity, in my mind, represent the cruxes of what we do every day. They are, to me, the most difficult parts of what I do. As a teacher, I was consistently concerned about whether I was engaging students in ways that were inclusive of some learners while excluding others. As a scholar who has spent my career studying academic cultures and ways of communicating, I was constantly asking myself whether I was adequately representing the voices of the communities I entered and engaged with. As an administrator, I will tell you, not a day passes where I'm not asking myself questions about how my decisions could privilege some while disenfranchising others. These are hard challenges, the hardest I've faced in the various roles I've had here on campus and off. Working through these challenges, these cruxes, takes work, careful thought, openness, humility, a willingness to admit imperfection, and a commitment to hearing things that are sometimes hard to hear. It is hard work, but it is work worth doing. Because just as the crux literally defines a climbing problem, I believe the way I work through issues related to equity and inequity defines me. And the way we work through the equity problems that face the universities and the communities we work with can define who we are as a collective. I am thrilled to be here to learn more about the various cruxes you all are working through in your scholarship. I cannot wait to hear about those you've worked through beautifully, and I am just as eager to hear about those that have been more problematic. I commend all of you for the work you are doing in this arena. It is hard, but important. It takes courage. One of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou is, "Without courage, we cannot practice any other virtue with consistency. We can't be kind, true, merciful, generous, or honest." I applaud the courage you all display by engaging with equity seriously in your scholarship and in your day-to-day interactions. Working through these cruxes, I hope, will lead to kind, true, merciful, generous, and honest conversations that will start today, but that will also persist. I look forward to engaging in these conversations and in working with you to create our collective together as one that is defined by a tireless commitment to equity. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, welcome. We are so excited to kick off this symposium with a panel. and panel where we get to feature the research that's being done at NC State and share with you some of the work that has been done over several years. My name is Julie Ivey. I'm a professor in the Edward P. Fitz Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering in the College of Engineering, and I represent the Research Leadership Academy. With me, my co-moderator, we have Dr. Phil Westmoreland and Dr. Kranos Williams, and we would like to share with you a panel looking at framing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so for this panel, we have invited several researchers from across our campus to share with us their work that they've been doing through their careers. First, we have Kofi Boone, we have Joy Gaston-Gales, we have Maria Mayorga, and then we also have Pamela McCauley, who is joining us, now we have her here, virtually. We're gonna start off this panel with each of the panelists introducing themselves and giving us a brief overview about their research. What we'd like this panel to be, though, is to be a dialogue. And so we're gonna have brief introductions, and then we wanna open it up for discussion and questions. So let us begin with Dr. Kofi Boone.
All right, good morning. Can you all hear me? All right, good morning. My name is Kofi Boone. I teach landscape architecture in the College of Design. I'm a native of Detroit, Michigan. Went to Michigan for my master's in landscape architecture and bachelor's in science and natural resources. Have been in North Carolina for the last 15 or 16 years, so happy to be here. When the slide goes up, you'll see one that talks about some of the work that we do. A lot of what we do is more applied research and translational research, trying to make the best available of what we develop here on campus to the communities we serve. And one of those communities is Princeville, North Carolina, which is the oldest African-American founded community by free black people in the United States, founded as Freedom Hill in 1865. And it's in the aftermath of Hurricane Matthew, which hit us in 2017, when a lot of us were connected to the Hurricane Matthew Disaster Recovery and Resilience Initiative, and trying to find steps to help this community move forward. And with regards to equity, it gets into two things that I do try and spend a lot of time on. Number one is procedural equity, making sure that how we make decisions, who's included, what the factors are, and what the impacts are well understood by everybody, with the loudest voice going to the most vulnerable to those decisions. And the other one is distributional equity, which starts to talk about distributing resources, information, capital, and other things so that communities can become more self-sufficient. Why this matters in Princeville, and to take a step back, it was being treated in a more mechanical way by the Office of Homeland Security and FEMA and other agencies that are used to dealing with disaster recovery in sort of a one-size-fits-all kind of way. And their math said, hey, this whole town just needs to move. That's the best thing we can do. We'll just buy you all out and you start over someplace else. And that's sort of the one-size-fits-all stamp that they were placing across the country. And so what we did as a team of researchers was say, well, wait, would you say that about Colonial Williamsburg? Or would you say that about Amsterdam? Or would you say that about Venice? No, you wouldn't, because there's a cultural value placed on those particular places that activate resources and connections. So why would you say that to the oldest black town in the United States and expect them to go along with it? So through our work with engagement, and what this picture features is a 5-day workshop that we led in Princeville after Matthew had recovered, that talks about the value of traditional environmental knowledge, local knowledge, in framing problems, framing solutions, collaboration, equal access to information, impact on decision-making, that has led to real concrete steps over the last 5 years to help that community become resilient and hopefully a model for how to incorporate cultural landscape traditions into how we think about disaster recovery. So we spend a lot of time dealing with how do we deal with people, how do we understand their positions, how do we understand the value of history, can we think creatively about deploying technologies that support those? If we can't, then we have to go to a default. But I was very surprised that, in recent history, how much learning is required by the federal government and others about the value of community. And so with regards to equity, those are two things that I'll probably reinforce later on is the power that research can have in intervening in situations that are inequitable, and then provide concrete strategies for dealing with the procedures and the distribution of resources. So be happy to talk about it further, but thank you for having me here.
We have Dr. Joy Gaston-Gale.
All right, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? All right. It's hard. I feel like this thing is double masked. I have a mask on, the mic has a mask on. We're all masked. So happy to be here today. Again, my name is Joy Gaston-Gales, and I'm a professor in the College of Education in Higher Ed, Leadership, Policy, Studies, Human Development. And I'm also senior advisor for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the College of Education. And my research, I've been a faculty member for a long time. We study people. That's what we do in higher ed, particularly people in college environments. And so a lot of my work focuses on how college impacts students, their experiences, their outcomes. And I'm also more recently interested in just people's experiences in the academy. And that is more broad and extends to faculty, all kinds of faculty, professional track, tenure track, students, as well as staff. And my work primarily focuses, I have two of recent book volumes that I edited with colleagues across the country. My work focuses in two areas. One is on women and underrepresented people in STEM fields, and so that's one of those volumes there. The other area of interest is intercollegiate athletics and the college student athlete experience. Now, you may be scratching your head saying those are two so different populations, like how do they come together? Well, the issue is that both groups experience structural barriers that impact their success and how far they can go. They also experience barriers within the college environment that also impact fair treatment and well-being. And so I think if you think about both of those populations, you can see the through line. And so that's what a lot of the work that I do explores, how we can remove barriers, how we can change systems and structures so that people can bring their full selves to their experiences, all of their gifts and talents, and thrive in the academy. And so this work has taken me to another place. I find myself in more leadership roles. A hallmark of my field in higher ed is that we very much bridge theory to practice, and so we don't study things for the sake of studying them. We also want to put them into good practice. And so I find myself doing that very thing in the various leadership roles that I take on, including senior advisor for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, because now I get to take the work that I've been doing and figure out, okay, how do we enact this in practice? And then how can we take what's happening in practice to go back to the research and inform it? And so it's a full circle moment for me. But all of my work always has undergirded or has at the heart of it issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what I'm most interested in now in these leadership roles is, we have a lot of, and Kofi, your remarks kind of reiterate this too, is that we have a lot of systems and structures in place that don't serve people well. And a lot of times in the research, we try to fix the people without fixing the systems. And so that is the work that I'm engaged in now, both as senior advisor for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I have the pleasure of being president of my professional association this year. And so that is the Association for the Study of Higher Education. And the presidential theme for this year, which is my year as president, is humanizing higher education. Because at the heart of it, if we don't value people, then we find ourselves in a lot of inequitable situations, right? Where people are disenfranchised, people are not treated fairly, and their well-being is not considered. And so I'm excited about this opportunity to spend the year with colleagues in higher ed across the country, across the world, in terms of figuring out what does it mean to humanize higher education? Like, how can we really get at the heart of that, and how can we incorporate that in the research that we do in post-secondary education? And so we have a lot of things have happened that has, for me, brought this to the forefront. This pandemic that we are still in and still experiences it's not that these inequities weren't here. I think COVID just shined a big old bright light on them, right? To say, oh, wow, people are really disenfranchised. There's a lot of inequities, and COVID had a way of exposing it or uncovering it so that not so much that the people who are experiencing them, they've always been able to see it, but so everybody else can see it, right? And so at the heart of that, this notion of the great resignation, like people are leaving all kinds of infrastructures and systems because of the inequities and the ways in which they have been dehumanized in their experiences. And so that is a problem that we're gonna have to face. And at the heart of it, people are hurting and people are tired. And we have to figure out how do we, treat people fairly, get at the heart of systems and structures that don't work anymore, and how can we change them so that everyone can thrive in the academy. And so I'll stop there, and I just have that picture there. That's actually in the Hunt Library, and I'll end with saying that the work we do really does matter, and it can change the world. It can change it in good ways, and it can change it in not so good ways. I hope that our discussions today will lead us to think about and really engage in how we can make the world a better place. Thank you.
Hello? Oh, okay, great. Okay. Oh, I can't see my own slide. My vision is bad. So I cheated. I put animation in so I can actually get more on the slide. Sorry about that. My name is Maria Mayorga. I'm in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at NC State. And what I do is mathematical and computer modeling, and specifically with a focus on health systems. And what I like to work on are, let's see if that will, so health systems deals with both from the operations, how you might have flow through the hospital, but also in medical decision making, coming up with the timing or the proper treatment for individuals or a cohort of individuals. And I love what, let's see, this is gonna, yeah. I love what Kofi said, because we are those people, right? We are the people who did the math that said that community should leave, right? But that's the problem, is that, when we do the math, we have to decide, so I'm gonna get a little bit technical here, on our objective function. We have a goal. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And sometimes we have these constraints, which are things that limit or don't allow for bad decisions. And the problem is that we don't have enough people considering that you can create a solution mathematically that does the right thing. But we never put that into the goal. We never put that into the objective function. Or we never thought that we should constrain it so that it doesn't do those negative things. And so I really like to work on problems that are going to have impact for social good. And I'll give you a little bit of a flavor of a few examples. So I worked on EMS, Emergency Medical Services Planning, where you're locating vehicles in different locations in order to improve the response time of 911 calls. And if you have a community, this is Richmond area in Virginia, if you have a community where you have an urban area in which calls get responded to quite quickly and more rural areas, if you just care about getting there quickly within a certain amount of time and you have no points assigned when you're just too late, then what happens? What happens is you could just ignore the people who are too far away because they don't impact your objective function, right? So in this case, we specifically looked at trying to do a multi-objective problem in which you care both about not just the response time, but also the equity, and we could define that in different ways. Is it rural locations that we care about? Is it the fact that the closest vehicle is assigned, different things like that. So in this case, equity was looked at from an urban versus a rural perspective. In another example, I study colorectal cancer, and colorectal cancer is highly preventable with screening. And when the ACA came in place, all of these preventative services became free. But for some people, still didn't qualify for health care. And so Medicaid expansion is one of those potential ways that we could increase health care access. But North Carolina did not expand Medicaid. So what's nice with computer modeling is we can say, well, what if, right? So we looked at it and said, well, what if we would have expanded Medicaid in North Carolina, and specifically looked at Black males. And we found that, you know, even though it might seem like a small group to focus on, within 6 years, all the costs that would have been put into that would have been returned because of the prevention of cancer cases that are much more expensive to treat when they're later stages. And lastly, since we're living it day to day, even today, as you all mentioned, we seem to be focusing on the wrong thing. So this is about COVID and vaccine distribution. It's great that we got the vaccines as quickly as we did. But when the rollout of vaccinations happened, even though equity was listed as one of the main concerns, it was actually never operationalized that way. The way that the vaccines were rolled out actually exacerbated inequities and the differences in deaths between minority groups. And if we had considered different rollout plans that tried to improve access for those minority groups, we could have potentially closed that gap. This is the idea that let's put that into the mathematical functions so that other people who are already know how to do that, it will automatically be part of their solution instead of you having to say, hey, you did something wrong. Okay, so I'll pass it on.
Thank you. Next, we have Pamela McCauley. Pamela McCauley.
But again, it's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. Although I'm virtual, I'm also thrilled to be with you today and talking about something that is just so important. And as I was listening to the panelists, there's so many opportunities for synergy. I'm already working with Dr. Gales on some things on campus, but I've only been at NC State for about almost 2 years now. I'm in the Wilson College of Textiles, where I serve as Associate Dean of Academic Programs, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Prior to that, I was at the University of Central Florida for 26 years. My background is industrial engineering, like Maria and Julie. And so I was in the industrial engineering department for 26 years and did many things. And particularly, my research sort of focuses in two areas similar to what Dr. Gales is saying. I mean, I've always had my technical research, which is ergonomics and biomechanics, and looking at opportunities to address disparities from an healthcare ergonomic standpoint is something that I focused on even when I did a Jefferson Science Fellow experience with the Department of State. And there are just so many opportunities for us to look at these different, the diversity, equity, and inclusion needs within, I think we all know within AI, our own Dr. Faycott Payton, who from NC State has looked at this extensively. And again, I'm so excited to be here because I do see that while there are challenges, there are so many opportunities. There are opportunities for us to use things such as algorithms to, rather than introduce bias, to reduce bias, whether it's in healthcare accessibility. Maria was talking about her modeling. I mean, we have the knowledge to begin to see some change and reduce some of this bias. And so it's vitally important that we come together in this manner to begin to do those things. But in addition to my research in ergonomics and biomechanics, you know, I've been very focused on the healthcare workers. 76% of healthcare workers are female, and 40% are underrepresented minorities. So you have a lot of diversity in healthcare, yet they're, from an ergonomic standpoint, looking at ways to keep these employees safe, looking at ways for them to effectively perform their tasks without debilitating injuries. There really has been a shortage of research in that area. So I have continued to do research in that space. But as I have grown in my career and in administration, I have looked at other ways where I can have greater impact. And that is really come to my attention, is that as we continue to see growth we want more women, more underrepresented minorities in STEM. Then we want them to go to advanced degrees. Now we want them to innovate. but the same problems persist at every level. And I served as program director at the National Science Foundation, leading the I-Corps program. And it was staggering to me, the lack of diversity among innovators that we were funding at I-Corps, but also looking more broadly. You see the statistics here, only less than 5% of our grantees that we funded were Hispanic or Latinx. 3.4% African American and Native American, I mean, not even 0.5%. And then we had about 18% women, and then not even 1% of disabled individuals. And the numbers are just as sad when you look at venture-backed firms, 1.8% Latinx and 1% African American startups. And so it's disturbing to me that we have all this innovation need. We have all these problems that we need to solve. You look at the UN SDGs, you look at the engineering's grand challenges, and look at the pandemic that we're experiencing, and all of the opportunity and need that there is for us to have everyone at the table, to hear diverse voices, diverse input, so that we can come up with solutions that work for everyone. And yet we are not bringing everyone to the table. And someone asked me, is it access or is it awareness? And when I was at NSF, and I said, I think it's a combination of both. So I think we have not made it accessible. In many cases, they aren't aware, but it's even bigger than that. When it is accessible, when they are aware, oftentimes when they are in the room, they are marginalized. So there's so many reasons for us to be serious about addressing this. When we look at the needs that we have in our global society, and we look at the demographics, it is absolutely essential that we have more conversations such as one's taking place in this room, but then that they are followed by actionable movements where we actually do something with the things that we've learned. So looking forward to our conversation today, and I will stop right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'd like to turn it over for questions. And I'm going to kick it off with the first question. I'd like each of our panelists to talk about, at a high level, topics or concerns where they really feel more research is needed for us to kind of move the envelope. And I believe that Pamela's going to start us off.
Well, I can continue with what I was saying, Julie. I really do think that understanding, and if we want to just take today's season, healthcare, that's such a broad brush when you look at disparities in healthcare, who gets access to healthcare, what is the quality of the care, even what Maria was saying, looking in the rural areas, who gets their 911 as quickly as possible. And so I think that is an area where we can have, there's a huge need. I think second, AI. Once again, we can use algorithms and AI to reduce bias, but right now that's not happening largely. We're seeing quite the opposite. We're seeing bias introduced because of many artificial intelligence systems. And so I think those are two very important areas. I mentioned healthcare. And that's, again, just a big brush, whether it's technology, whether it's looking at the physical aspects of the workplace, but we're woefully under-researched areas as it relates to DE&I.
Thank you.
I would jump off of what Pamela said in terms of AI. One of the big issues we have is that there's already bias built into the data that is collected, and so therefore you're just propagating that bias sometimes in your algorithms. But there is a huge issue with access to data or data collected at the right scale. Even with some of the COVID research we have a very we don't have information to even say what is the disparity between different age groups, different races, because it might not be accessible at that level of granularity. So I think we need to, hold those that are collecting the data accountable and say we want to have the information at that level so that we can study it. Because without that, then the model doesn't work or the AI tool doesn't work.
I'll build off something that I'm taking a slightly different approach. I think that when we do research, like context matters. And so you have to understand the historical legacies and histories of exclusion and inclusion exclusion so that you can understand how we got to where we are. And without that context, what you do and how you do it, like you'll just perpetuate systems of inequity that have existed for a very long time. But when we go back and look at things from, and by centering the experiences of different people, I think you can tap into how you can then think about the problem from the vantage point of the people who are experiencing the problem. A lot of times we learn statistical methods and all these ways of answering problems, but we don't consider the context. And so I think much more needs to be researched in that way so that we are not inadvertently perpetuating the problems we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. I do want to bring up climate and the fact that our planet is not going to be the same. It's not the same now, but it's definitely not going to be the same in a generation. And what do we need to do to prepare for that? And I think part of that is maybe an interrogation of what we mean by research. I think a lot of communities I work with see research as an extractive process where it's structured so that we benefit as researchers. It's structured so that people who can implement and deploy the research benefit, but the actual communities that are being harmed by either climate justice issues, environmental justice issues, others, they don't benefit at all. And so, there's been a lot of pushback on the perception and role of research when you're working with communities, vulnerable communities. That has forced us to really think about the elevating and collaborating more effectively and building into our research models local knowledge and traditional environmental knowledge, which is forcing us to think more about a collaborative and a transformational relationship as opposed to a transactive one. So I think with the scale and the scope of the things that are happening to our planet now, putting what do we really mean by research on the table, especially as we're engaging communities who are facing those issues, I think is a major area we need to focus on.
All right, thank you. I'll move on to the next question. So from modeling research to community research to education research, can any of you speak to the unintended consequences of really not having full awareness of how diversity and equity affects the research that you do in terms of not only your research outcomes, but potentially even in terms of training the next generation of students? And can you speak to any things that you have done in your own programs to try to alleviate those unintended consequences? Joy, would you mind taking that question first?
Sure. So I did a talk recently at my alma mater, The Ohio State University, and it was a series on approaches to qualitative inquiry. And part of my remarks included, like, what happens when we don't consider diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I call them dangers. Like we can find ourselves in dangerous territory when the work that we do does not center equity. And so, Maria, your comments express this, like we can really do things that are damaging to people. And that's one of the things I highlight, like dehumanization occurs when we don't take equitable approaches to research and inquiry. People are not valued, as in your example, Kofi. People are not respected, and they find themselves further disenfranchised in society. So that's the first danger. Another danger is, I alluded to this earlier, we end up assigning problems to people instead of fixing the systems that cause the problems in the first place. And the first thing that comes to mind from an education context is the achievement gap. Like, we know that there's an achievement gap, but our approach thus far has been to try to fix children instead of fixing the educational systems in which they are teaching or learning, or where teaching and learning occurs. And so we have to again, continue to push back and challenge and poke holes in our systems and structures and figure out how they contribute to the problem and not dehumanize children and make them feel like they don't fit in a system that wasn't designed necessarily for them. And then the other danger is, again, we end up creating, sustaining, perpetuating discriminatory policies and practices because we don't consider that bias is embedded within a lot of the policies and practices that we hold ourselves accountable, like we hold ourselves to. And so we have to continuously challenge and rethink what our policies and practices are, and what our research methods are, and how they sometimes can inherently have bias within them. But if we keep using them unchallenged, then again, we end up perpetuating the problems we're trying to get rid of. And so, the other thing, when people are in the academy and we have a certain way of viewing knowledge, right? Anybody who does work outside of that to try to expand it, they experience a lot of pushback, whether, they don't get the same consideration in the tenure promotion system because they're pushing boundaries. And so part of our job is to expand what we consider knowledge. We need to expand some of our methods in terms of how we do research, because if you're going to incorporate equity, you're going to have to expand beyond what we're currently doing and how we're currently doing it. And so I'll stop there and let my other panelists contribute.
Kofi, Maria, Pamela, do you have anything to add?
Well, I mean, I certainly can appreciate that and all that Joy is saying. I know that from a physical ergonomics standpoint, I mean, when you don't have diversity, just one example is in my ergonomics lab, I did some research on looking at the biomechanics of body-worn camera for law enforcement. And so we were only looking at men, and I said that's a problem because when you look at the anthropometrics or the difference in the body structures of men and women, and you make a judgment about what is the ideal body camera, you need to take into consideration those types of factors. And so I think if we don't, in our individual research, make sure that we have a diverse and inclusive approach to the subjects, to the data. And I think Maria, someone on the panel said, making sure that the data sets we're looking at aren't biased, and so I've had to look at the sources of the normative data that I utilize from an anthropometric standpoint, because a lot of it was from military, which was men and predominantly white men in previous years. So really understanding, how to use the data that I'm using in my lab, but also, and when I'm looking at the subject pool, making sure that it is inclusive of all that are being impacted.
I want to talk a little bit about translational research. That is, how intellectual merit is great, scholarship is important, understanding is important, but how it translates to action as well. Kofi, could you talk about that and how communities benefit?
Yeah, I can. I think that, referencing the Princeville story we were discussing in the beginning, in the middle of that, we got contacted by the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans, who's still trying to recover from Hurricane Katrina, decades later. And we're like, are you sure that you need more designers coming down there drawing pretty pictures and, drawing stupid models and stuff? No, we don't want that. There's actually a very funny AIA video, if you're interested online, about how they didn't want that. But what it did was it helped us to think about how do we translate the best knowledge we know into tools that people can use? And in their case, it was not physical design by itself, it was organizational transformation. There was a need for evidence that would help them to shape policy and organize in new ways to elevate change. They'd had a lot of people kind of parachuting in and making nice buildings. If you Google Brad Pitt right now, you'll see there's a class action lawsuit against him and the Make It Right Foundation for using the lower Ninth Ward as a science experiment of sustainable development. So the translational side became, what are the best tools to help them have real conversations about the barriers that are preventing them from organizing and moving forward as a community. And they got into really ugly conversations about race, about gender, about history, a lot of things that we don't often talk about when we talk about research, but were essential for them to develop a level of trust and understanding that made them more receptive to understanding more of the technical components we were dealing with there. And it did result in some basic understandings about why that area was under threat and vulnerable, that it wasn't the same for everybody, whole cloth for that particular community, that there were different strategies based on where you were, but that there was a need for them all to work together. So I think that I admire the creation of new knowledge and innovation in research a great deal. In design, we aspire to that, but we spend a lot of our time trying to apply it and enact it in the built environment. And so this notion of translation is sort of embedded in how we tend to think about things. How do we apply it? How do we use it? How do we learn from it? How do we improve it? Through action. So, that's one example that I would offer.
I think this, especially for maybe engineering, goes back to Kofi's earlier question of what is research, because I think a lot of the difficulty in translation is that the funding is often not there for that component. We get funded to create new knowledge, sometimes to create tools, but then there's an expectation that you're going to hand it off and somebody's going to implement it, and they don't necessarily have the training, or the tool is too rough for them. Like, that's not necessarily what they need. It's not the context. It doesn't fit their community. So one example I have is in my COVID work, I was talking to a lot of different people, and we were specifically trying to get some funding to try to focus on equity in different communities. This was actually Prince George's County in Maryland, who also has a lot of history behind it. And this one councilwoman, she was really upset because she had 16 people die that she knew. And the vaccination centers were not coming to where she was. Or they would put up these mass vaccination centers and expect that people were just going to show up. She specifically, what we did is not funded, right? It was just kind of like the group that was working on it thought, well, something needs to happen. So we kind of looked at the community. She had specific focus on it. Actually, this group was different than what's traditionally in Prince George's County. They have a large group of immigrants from Guatemala who are indigenous peoples who don't speak Spanish either. They don't speak English, they don't speak Spanish, they speak native languages. And so it's very difficult to get the information to them. They also are scared and because of immigration status issues, and so they were not necessarily going to seek help. And but their children or their grandchildren often did speak Spanish. So what we did with some very rough modeling, could be done in a classroom. It doesn't necessarily have to be, breaking ground research, is figure out where are the buildings where we should actually take the vaccination center to them, because at least we got the county to allow us some resources to go take the vaccination centers to them. And so we did, work with the people in the building to get like the phone numbers, go door to door, telling them when it was going to be available, and then show up, find out what the best time for them was, because they wanted to do it. They had scheduled it at noon, and we're like, what are you talking about? People are working, kids are in school, like this is not the best time. So 7 p.m. became the time. People knew about it, and we got most of the people in that building vaccinated on time. But that's not research, right? And unfortunately, it has to be. Why does it have to be me or somebody else going out of what they're doing? Why can't we spend some funds or have something allotted for, okay, what do you do beyond that? How can we actually go and make impact in the community now, meet them where they're at, rather than hoping that, somebody in the legislature or something is going to read the paper eventually and implement it when it's too late, especially with something like COVID, where it's time is of essence.
Yeah.
Pamela, you'd want to?
Yeah. I mean, I so agree with you, Maria, with what you're saying on that. And I mean, the academy is an interesting place. I mean, years ago, it's much friendlier today to innovation and to, I'll use the term innovation for impact or applied research than it was, say, 30 years ago when some of us first started. And in fact, we used to be proud, NSF would brag about only funding, basic research, but some of that is changing. But I think we as a community of researchers, of academics, of people in the academy who want to see real research have that impact, that we have a responsibility to start talking to federal agencies and those who fund research about the need to start to see this. And then, of course, I think, Joy, I think you mentioned about, in the academy when it comes to promotion and tenure, or how do we view success? Because what you did was significant, Maria, in doing that. But, how much are we going to value that? And so I think it's for those of us who are more senior in the academy, it really is up to us to begin to address this. And I funded a project when I was at NSF as a program director, and I called it a seismic shift in the academy, where we are looking at what do we consider to be measures of success or impact. Because like you said, if we write a paper and we want to look at our H index, or how many people read our citation index, how many people are reading our papers, is that really having the kind of impact that we need to be having with our knowledge and with what we know, what we can know, and particularly when we work together. So I do think that it's a whole other conversation that we need to be having in terms of how we approach the funding agencies, because that drives a lot of what we do, and how we speak to them about how we see a need to have a higher level of impact. And the funding is going to be a factor as it relates to that.
Last word.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Pamela and Maria said. We have a series in the College of Education called Ask the Expert, and I was asked to do it on the difference between equality and equity. And so I think we need to understand what equity is, and what you described, Maria, is a good way of thinking about it and defining it. A lot of times we approach research into practice by giving everybody the same thing, which is equality. That's not going to have an impact, because what if what I'm providing doesn't work for this community for a whole host of reasons, right? But equity is thinking about what people need and giving them that, which may sound strange, but if I put a COVID vaccination site here, and I'm trying to distribute it equally, it's not going to work for a whole host of people. You got to go to those people and ask them what they need and give them that, if you want to have an impact on a particular community who has been marginalized for a long time, right? So I just wanted to make a connection between, a lot of what we do in practice is rooted in equality, which is not going to solve a lot of the problems that are more equity-based.
Well, this kickoff panel is supposed to set the stage for the whole day. We've got a host of different events going on, many of them in parallel, several of them being shown on Zoom. Hope you enjoy them all. They're starting at 9:45. Let's thank all the panelists here and Pamela in the distance. Thank you.